On January 2nd, 2007, I returned to work after taking a couple weeks off for vacation. And the first call that came in about 8 a.m. that morning was from my admin letting me know that she was running late. She had a flat tire and was stranded out on 394 in Wayzata. It was a cold morning. I thought, I gotta get her out of there, so I drove out to 394 to basically pick her up. And when I pulled up, I thought, let's change that tire. And in the process of changing that tire, an individual traveling on the shoulder at 55 miles an hour struck me from behind, pinning me between two vehicles. They picked me up off of 394 and brought me out to North Memorial Medical Center.
I remember I was actually in surgery that morning, and I got a call from one of the trauma surgeons, one of the other trauma doctors at North Memorial.
I was working with Dr. Kamek, just doing a regular scheduled case, and my supervisor called into the room and said, "You have a bump case, a trauma, bilateral leg trauma."
There was a patient who had come in who was in a serious accident, had both of his legs badly injured, and they were concerned about whether or not his legs were going to be able to be saved. And I remember finishing up what I had done and then went and met Aaron for the first time.
He just had a positive energy, even laying there in this huge trauma that he had just endured.
We rushed to the hospital. When we got there, we found out that Aaron was in stable condition and that his injuries were really contained to his legs, but they were very serious.
We talked, and I remember talking to him about the fact that I probably wasn't going to be able to save his legs. It was a hard discussion to have, and it was hard for him to hear that, I'm sure. He sort of, from what I remember, that Aaron, basically said, we have to do what we have to do, and let's do what we have to do and move on. And
I remember grabbing my wife's hand when she first saw me and said, "I love you, but we're gonna need an attorney. We're gonna need some help here." My attitude towards what had happened, I think, kind of set the stage as to how we were going to deal with this. What happened. We need to form groups and figure out what I got myself into this time and find out what my future looked like. We needed to paint that picture. My wife, my friends began forming project teams and assigning projects to each individual on that team. I spent 18 days in the hospital, had 6 surgeries, and when I returned home to my home, I was picked up by my wife in a van that was rented that had accessibility, so I could wheel out of the hospital. I could get into this van without any issues, without any problems. We drove home. I rolled out of the van and into my house via ramps that were set up by the construction team. I was able to get upstairs that night and tuck my kids into their beds, read them their books, and go to my bed and go to sleep that night. And that's 18 days after the accident. We were able to set a pace early on and continue that pace until I was to where I am today. And I was fortunate to have the help of family and friends that came together and formed these project teams and branched out to do the diligence, to do the research that it took for every aspect of my recovery: transportation, home modifications, legal, finance, etc. I look at that and I thought, not everybody is as fortunate as I was to have that support group, but that's what we can give back to the community. So in 2008, I resigned from my full-time job to form Wiggle Your Toes, a nonprofit organization that helps the amputee community in their recovery efforts. Unlike any other organization, Wiggle Your Toes is working with the individual that suffered an amputation. And what we're helping do is prioritize the components that are needed for a successful recovery. Things that they won't think of because they haven't been there, they haven't done that.
Aaron's determination is really the premise of Wiggle Your Toes. The groundwork that we have done and he has done for his recovery is really what we want to share with others because we've already been through it, and because he was so successful, we feel as though we have a story that we can share and information that we can give others that will help them through this difficult time.
The ability for patients to get back to to living a normal life and having a job and feel like they're contributing to their community and contributing to society, I think is huge. And I think the support that people have goes a long ways to making that possible. And I think it is possible. I know I've seen lots and lots of patients who've been able to be very productive members of society despite having been through an amputation.
Financially, we may just simply make a donation to their fund or to them as an individual. We've helped out with medical assistance, medical equipment. We've worked with individuals and families to put together fundraisers, medical costs and modifications and transportation and things like that. That all costs money.
For the most part, patients have access to good technology through insurance and that sort of thing, but there's certainly cases where they don't. And I think that if there's resources available to help those people, it'd be a great thing.
We've bought a treadmill for an individual who was learning to walk and was afraid that she wasn't going to be able to cover any ground in the Minnesota winters. She got her leg in November. We got a treadmill delivered to her house.
I'd go to physical therapy like the Courage Center and I'd walk on a treadmill and they're like, you need a treadmill, you need this. Well, they're expensive and you need a really good one as an amputee. You need one that can take the force of that walking. I sent an email to Wiggle Your Toes and I kind of put a call out to Aaron and I'm like, do you know any way that I might be able to get a treadmill? All of a sudden in October, a year ago, I got an email from him and said, it's going to be delivered to your house, I need your address. I started walking on it immediately. Walking on the treadmill just gave me a sense of normalcy. And I hate to throw that out there because I'm still normal, I just have a funky cool leg.
A big part of what we're doing is just providing that inspiration and that motivation to somebody who was where I was a couple years ago and not knowing what their future looked like. To be able to walk into a hospital room and see somebody and talk to somebody that had just suffered an amputation. They're sitting there wondering, what is the rest of my life looking like? And somebody like me or one of the other group peer members at Wiggle Your Toes can walk in as a unilateral or as a bilateral and say, you know what, I'm playing softball, I'm riding my bike, I'm jogging, I'm golfing, I went back to work, this is how I did it. To be able to share a personal story like that with an individual that has recently suffered an amputation is invaluable.
When you're an amputee, there's going to be the despair. There's going to be the feeling of hopelessness. But again, when you have support and you have people behind you that are saying you can do this, they're not saying you have to do this, but you can do this. And here's an example of how.
Having that support and having people behind you that is a part who have come together with Wiggle Your Toes to support people like Rick and I and our family. The network of people that Wiggle Your Toes has, the professionals that they know, the willingness to look at unique situations or unique things and say, we may not have the answers, but at least we're going to try. That keeps your heart going, and that keeps you speeding towards the next day and the next opportunity. And having that is imperative to being able to get through all of this.
I think there's a huge advantage in patients who can have some sort of contact with people who've been through it. And to have those sort of resources available through Wiggle Your Toes, people to talk to, ideas of what to expect next, what kind of things you need to be thinking about, I think is just a fantastic thing. And I think it's going to be a huge help to patients.
To have a vision of where you want to go and then also have the framework of how you're going to get there is just something that is priceless for someone who's going through a traumatic injury that results in limb loss.
We've a short amount of time and we have great momentum going forward. I'd like to thank everybody who's helped us in our recovery efforts and in our vision of putting Wiggle Your Toes together. And we really do appreciate everybody's support. Some people say stop and smell the roses, and we say wiggle your toes. It's just one of those things because you can. It's simple things that you take for granted in life, like wiggling your toes.